Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj and the journalist, author and broadcaster, I've just added that, Jenny Kleeman. Welcome and great to see both of you. As ever, we crack on with the front pages. The government's shift on net zero pledges makes the front of tomorrow's Express, which looks ahead to the Prime Minister's speech on Friday. Same story on the front of the Daily Mail, which hails the change on net zero plans as common sense, also asking if this is the moment the Prime Minister turns the tide. The Guardian says the policy will see the Conservatives attempting to create a dividing line with Labour ahead of the next election. Meanwhile, toxic brand is the Metro's headline, remarking on the latest developments in the Russell Brand controversy as YouTube demonetises his videos and the BBC and Channel 4 remove his content from their platforms. He continues to deny any wrongdoing. The Eye says the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, will reject the European Union's master plan and is not interested in the UK rejoining a revamped EU. The Birmingham Post calls the city's local government the Council of Despair after the Community Secretary Michael Gove appointed administrators to run it because it has effectively declared itself bankrupt. The Mirror leads on the Education Secretary Gillian Keegan's comments about RAC in schools and the suggestion that children enjoy studying in portakabin classrooms. And finally, the Daily Star has a more humorous take on the same story. I think you read that one for yourself, don't you? Now then, don't forget to scan the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, and you can check out the front pages for yourself of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Ali and Jenny. Right, kick off with net zero. PM forced into a statement tonight after what he called leaks. Big speech coming up later this week, Ali.
That's right, and this is all to do with net zero, Anna, and there are a few elements to it. We believe that the Prime Minister, or at least it's being reported that the Prime Minister is going to be looking at pushing back this phasing out of diesel and petrol cars from 2030 to 2035, also reducing the requirement for all gas boilers to be phased out by 2035, probably maybe only 80% of them, and also reducing energy efficiency measures required by private rented sector landlords. Now, why are they doing this? Because basically they're 18 to 20 points behind in the polls. They're absolutely thinking, what on earth are we going to do to try and pull anything back? I mean, the reality is that this is all about minimising the defeat, not winning an election. And they're going to try and come up with something. And they're driven by the fact that in the Uxbridge and South Russet by-election, they managed to squeak in and hold that seat by 495 votes. So this is the great panacea that they've been searching for.
So you're saying, so I'm going to read the quote from Rishi Sunak's statement tonight. Our politics must again put the long-term interests of our country before the short-term political needs of the moment. You're suggesting the short-term political needs are dictating the long-term demands of this nation.
I have to say, I think that quote from Sunak is kind of Kafkaesque, because this is the short-term thinking of somebody who really believes they're going to be losing the next general election, desperately scrabbling around of, oh, people like this, people liked it in Uxbridge when we went back against ULEZ. It takes us for fools here. We need long-term strategic thinking. We need long-term plans. And the idea that the government is still committed to net zero and yet is going to push back these targets, not just on banning diesel and petrol cars by 2035 instead of 2030. It's also to do with gas boilers. It's also no taxes on flying or on food choices, a whole variety of things that were leaked today. How are we going to fulfil our net zero commitments without those things or other big, bold plans? And what's interesting about this is this does create a clear dividing line between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party at the time of the next election, because Labour have promised to invest billions in green policies, and this sounds
like... They've rowed back too,
they did.
They have rowed back to an extent, but then, you know, nobody is suggesting anything like this. This is playing into the hands of a particular constituency of people who perhaps haven't been supported very well when it comes to things like ULEZ. It hasn't been implemented very well, but, you know...
Or is it playing into the fact that people feel poor?
Well, I think so. And the thing is, I agree with Jenny to a certain extent, but Sunak would argue, the Prime Minister would argue, that you've got to take people with you. And in the middle of a cost of living crisis, The question is, which no one wants to answer, is who pays for all this? That's the thing.
Well, in a cost of living crisis, if you've got to take people with you, the government could do more to support people in, for example, having electric cars.
The government's on 2.5 trillion of
the government's paying £8 million a day to put people up in hotels because of the backlog. And, you know, the whole point is Rishi Sunak doesn't really care about green policies. He didn't want to go to COP27. He only went because Boris Johnson was going to go there and show him up. He's never shown an interest in this stuff.
He's not gone to the UN General Assembly right now, either, has he?
He's not. It's not a priority for him.
Let's take a look at The Guardian then, shall we? Because the question is who's going to like this decision when it comes later this week. And The Guardian says there's Tory dismay as the PM seeks to soften net zero pledges. Which young people are going to vote Tory, Ali, after decisions like this?
Well, I do think that there is a problem for the Tories generally with younger voters anyway, not only on the...
So we write them off, do we?
Well, on the environmental
issue... They talk
issue,
to their parents.
Indeed, and parents are also very concerned about this, and I do think that this is a danger here for the Tory party in terms of how they're handling this issue. I mean, Chris Skidmore, who wrote a report into Net Zero, is actually saying, and quoted here, saying that we will look back on this moment as Sunak's slow-motion car crash. And it reminds me what Jenny just said there about the short-term thinking here reminds me of what Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, said in a speech in 2015. He lamented the tragedy of the horizon when it comes to policymakers taking a long-term view. They never look beyond 4 or 5 years to the next election. Yes. And this Guardian piece is talking about the measures that could potentially be kicking the can down the road yet again. I do understand, though. I do understand that people are going to be... This is going to be costly for people, and the government just simply doesn't have any cash. That's the problem. Yeah. So I do understand that.
But then you look what is happening in America with Biden's massive investment programmes in green energy, the European Union hinting it will also match it. And in fact, Grant Shapps, when he was in charge of whatever department that was, suggested the UK would do the same.
We're absolutely nowhere on it. We're nowhere on it.
Yes, and The Guardian says, you know, he quotes a senior Tory who says this would be the greatest mistake of Sunak's premiership and that watering down the targets could cost jobs, put up energy bills and damage the UK's international reputation. So this is incredibly short-term thinking. It's myopic. It is, as you say, based on this clinging on to the fact that, oh, we won in Oxbridge is pathetic, really.
Well, just over a week ago, the suggestion was that £75 million of government money was going towards BMW to help them electrify their car fleet. And there had been promises made to the car makers that the net zero promise on new diesel and petrol cars after 2030 being banned would stick. Because otherwise, why are they putting money into it? So what's happened with those supposed promises made to car makers?
Well, that's the thing. And one of the things that is being said here very clearly by the private sector is, and this is actually quoting various business groups, and one came out of me saying, I just came out of a meeting where a chunk of the British economy was assured by ministers that net zero was a top priority, and now it isn't. So if you're an investor, investors want security. They want to know the direction of travel from a government. And also the government has a real key role as an enabler to crowd in private capital. They're not going to crowd in private capital if they don't know from one day to the next what the policy is. And the government doesn't need to spend all the money itself, but what it can do is provide some subsidy for electric vehicle charging, for example, to get in private money.
And the whole point is if you have a deadline, then businesses will invest in the need for charging, for example. Daily Mail, let's take a look at the opposite side from The Guardian, shall we? Finally, common sense on net zero. Is this the moment Rishi turned the tide or turned him... I don't understand that. Turned himself, who knows? Anyway, the point is that they are approving of it. Is that it, Ali?
Yeah, I mean, there are some people who will always oppose anything to do with net zero, that think it's a kind of bonkers plan. And particularly, there is a sense that there is some people feel that car owners are under siege. But I would say, again, that this is to do with poor implementation of these schemes. This is to do with scrappage schemes not being properly sorted out. There not being enough charges. There not being enough subsidies for the kinds of cars that we are being nudged towards. But, you know, there are a lot of people who will agree with this. The fact is, we know there was a report out today from climate researchers saying that the storms that happened in Libya that have resulted in the deaths of thousands of people were 50 times more likely because of man-made climate change. We have to do something. We have signed up to international agreements here. if it's not going to be the 2030 petrol car ban, what else is it going to be for us to get to net zero? Because we have to do something.
OK. Yeah, he talked about heading to net zero by 2050. Remember, this is net zero by 2050. He's not talking about 2030s. In a more proportionate way. The Daily Mail talks about a more pragmatic approach. The Times is just in. We'll take a lot to boot off Russell Brand, I guess, from their front page. But there it is. Sunak set for retreat on climate promises. The deadline for gas boil is expected to be ditched as petrol and diesel car sales continue until 2035. So that's 5 years. Now, some might say, why would 5 years make any difference when we have massively reduced our CO2 output compared to other nations around the world? And people look at nations like China or India or many others who are not doing as much.
Well, Narendra Modi was very, very clear at the G20 that, look, don't put it all on India. I mean, it's our time to industrialise. You had your time. This is ours. So that is not going to be an easy conversation to have at all. And developing countries, less developed countries, are also talking about loss and damage. So all of these things are complex. But if we want to be leading by example, then we should be doing our bit. However, I do believe that things like ULEZ and these things were brought in insensitively in outer London at a time when people are suffering, and I think it could have been done in a much better way. You do need to bring people on this journey with you. So I do have some sympathy with the PM, but I still don't think that this myopic approach to life is actually going to help us in the long term.
And, we can't have it both ways. Either we are a big voice on the global stage and we matter, or we're not. And you can't go around saying, well, we're not doing it if China and India are not doing it. We have to lead by example. As one of the wealthier countries, we have to lead by example. And that is a question of political will.
Which industrialise first.
Well, yes, I think the climate change news this week is the Antarctic ice sheets, isn't it? That's the very latest, well, effectively horror show. Just quickly, there is the Times on Russell Brand, the Times, Sunday Times, Channel 4's Dispatch is leading the way on this. The BBC's Director General has said that the corporation broadcasts completely unacceptable material from Russell Brand. Let's move on then to the other coverage. It's the lead again for Metro, toxic brand, deplatforming, loss of business. There's the inside pages as well. So, what are we beginning to see? That, the world for him is shrinking in terms of
yes, and for a man who is so loquacious and outspoken, there has been so much silence. The idea that he is being shut off platforms is very interesting. I mean, there are different things going on here. It must be said that YouTube is still hosting Russell Brand's content. It's just not allowing him to make money off them. And this is a commercial decision. There was a big scandal, I don't know if you remember, a few years ago when HSBC and other brands were putting adverts on YouTube videos of far-right extremists. They don't want to alienate their advertisers. That's why they've demonetised his account. It's not over any moral high ground, but it does seem like, the walls are closing in for Russell Brand.
We're running out of time. I've just seen the time. We better stop. Just one sentence.
Look, I find Russell Brand reprehensible. The allegations are very serious, but the place to determine guilt or innocence is in a court of law.
OK. We will no doubt debate that later on. Thank you very much indeed. Lots more still to come. Apparently, Sir Keir Starmer doesn't like the idea of the UK rejoining the EU as a so-called associate member. More on that in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Ali Miraj and Jenny Kleeman. Welcome back to both of you. So, Keir Starmer with the French president today, not supposed to happen, meeting the opposition leader, is it? It's led to a flurry of headlines, not least in the Eye, about what Sir Keir Starmer, or how Sir Keir Starmer would position the UK should he win the next election in relation to the European Union, including this idea of a master plan of sort of tiered membership, effectively, Jenny.
Yes, there's an idea that there might be a kind of inner circle with different layers. It all sounds rather complicated and mysterious, and that the UK could be involved somehow in an outer tier, in a third tier of the EU as a kind of partner. And this is the kind of talk that is a bit dangerous to have around Keir Starmer if you're a Labour Party strategist, because what you don't want is for people to suggest that you're trying to rejoin the EU or any kind of EU alliance by the back door. This is what he's rejecting it, or he's saying that he's rejecting it. However, he wants to look statesmanlike on the world stage. Going to meet the President of France helps with that. Also, there is a sense that our Brexit of taking back control has led to the small boats crisis in many ways, because we've opted out of the returns deal that would have allowed us to return migrants to Europe. We do need to have a better relationship with Europe than we have now. And so he does need to be seen to be talking to Europe. So it's a kind of very thin ice that he's standing on. He needs to be making those alliances, but then not appearing so close as to alienate people who are worried about Brexit.
Very quickly, Ali, on this one.
Well, I mean, the French and German Europe ministers have come up with the wedding cake approach to Europe, where they've got this tiered approach. And we're going to be, apparently they're suggesting we could be in the third tier, which actually means joining up to the single market again. I can't see that happening at all, because one of the fundamental four freedoms is freedom of movement. And that's one of the reasons why people voted for Brexit. So I don't think that's going to work. I think Starmer knows that. He doesn't want to alienate Labour voters that voted Brexit last time. He needs them back. But he wants a more pragmatic relationship with Europe. And for those Brexiteers who are lamenting that fact, well, what on earth has happened for the better since we've left? So I think it's sensible.
Yeah, quick 30 seconds, if you don't mind, on the Birmingham Post, the Council of Despair, not surprising after today.
Yes, 2 weeks ago, it said it went past. Michael Gove was talking about how the Commission is going to move in and take over. But, you know, there are many different councils who are also on the verge of declaring themselves effectively bust. The government says it's to do with poor leadership. The council say it's to do with 15 years of cuts. We'll see what happens. It's very upsetting that Birmingham might have to sell off its library.
Well, more like also a massive 1.1 billion liability they've already paid, and another 750 odd million in relation to not paying female workers the same as men. Yeah. I mean, how on earth could you get that so badly wrong? Bizarre.